The Mayberry Investments Limited Virtual Investor Forum has been the standard for investor education in Jamaica for decades, where top financial minds provide comprehensive insight into the market and ideal investment strategies and opportunities for our clients. Celebrating 37 years of excellence in investment banking. The Mayberry Virtual Investor Forum, investing in Jamaica.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of our weekly Investor Forum. I'm your host, Dan Theok, Senior Vice President of Investment Banking. And today we'll be looking at Wigton Wind Farm Limited. And who better to have join us other than the new incoming CEO himself, Gary Barrow. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I want to give apologies for the absence of our chairman and CEO, Chris Berry and Gary Peart, but I think we'll be able to manage without them. If you like the content, don't forget to hit the like button and to share this video. And if you haven't done so yet, then remember to subscribe and hit the bell to receive all future notifications. We upload content just like this, just about once per week. Also, it's about that time that you embarked on your very first investment journey. Remember, patience wins the investment game, not speed. That means the earlier you start, the better. Why not take that first investment step with Mayberry Investments Limited? Follow us on social media today to get started. Also, guys, don't forget that we'll have a Q&A segment at the end of the program, so make sure to submit your questions so we can address them at the end. Okay, first up, let me tell you a little bit about Gary Barrow. Gary has over 30 years of experience in telecoms and the electric utility industry in the region. In addition to his business experience, he has a multidisciplinary background in engineering, finance, technology, innovation, business transformation, process reengineering, governance, and people management. Prior to joining Wigton, Gary served as Chief Operating Officer at GPS, where he led enterprise-wide strategic planning and executed some of the game-changing projects in their digital transformation and other business innovations. Gary holds a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering, a Master and an MBA, and has completed his global leadership development programs with INSEAD in countries such as France, the UK, China, Spain, and the USA. So welcome again, Gary. And today I have to declare lots of conflicts, folks. So one, I've known Gary for over 10 years. We worked together at JPS, where I did 16 years and he did 10, I want to say. What we didn't say also on the panel is Gary was CEO and headed up Cable and Wireless and did an exceptionally good job, particularly down in Trinidad and Tobago, one of the few regions where you guys were able to fight off Digicel. Is my memory correct? Good deal. So Gary's an experienced CEO, incredible guy, and so we are very pleased, Gary, to see you now heading up Wigton Wind Farm. I think you're going to do a great job. Okay, time to declare my conflicts or our conflicts. So I am a board director of Wigton, so I want to declare that conflict, and that's by virtue of Mayberry being the largest shareholder in Wigton, owning about 9%. Of the shares. And for sure, we'll be talking about the fact that the 10% limit has gone away. And so we certainly expect to see other large investors coming on board. But right now, the top five largest shareholders includes folks like Mayberry, VMBS, National Insurance Fund, ATL Pension Fund, and a Sagicor holding entity that represents an individual who I will not name in this moment. Okay, so first up, I want to dive into the audited results for Wigton, which are fantastic. So first up, I want to look at the financial results, which shows the year end is March 2024, and it shows essentially that the business did exceptionally well at the bottom line, top line, we see that sales actually fell by 7%, and revenues overall were down because production, which is driven by wind, was down by approximately 17%. We saw that in their management accounts, and that impacted revenues. So it's the wind regime, just nature. This year compared to the prior year, the wind production was down by 17%, and that impacted the business revenues. That flowed all the way down to the gross profit, which also fell 7% to $1.27 billion. But the business has been doing well in terms of operating profit, generating $898 million of operating profit, a 16% fall, again, in line with the 17% fall in production, which is driven by wind. There was an increase in admin costs, which is tied to inflation of about 11%. A lot of that just sort of tied to inflationary increase, so that could not be helped. And so we see where the operating profit was $897 million, down by 16% from roughly $1.1 billion the year before. Finance costs were down 4% to $405 million as the business continues to pay down debt. We'll talk a lot about that. They paid down about $800 million in debt during the year. Business, in terms of cash flow from operations, also generated about $800 million of cash flows, which we used primarily to pay down debt. And I'll talk a little bit about the balance sheet side in a second. And then what we see happening is a huge swing in the taxation charge, going from a taxation charge of $327 million the year before to now a taxation income of $358 million. And that's really the big game changer for the financial results for this year that result in the $839 million profit for the full year, which is a 172% increase over the previous year. Largest profit the company's ever made. And it's driven primarily by this taxation swing. And what that's about is the fact that Wigton, in the previous year, was assessed as needing to change its taxation rate to 33.33%, which was sort of what the law says for regulated entities. And we pushed back at that and said, surely you don't want to have a renewable energy company that used to pay taxes at 25%, paying taxes at 33.33%. And the Minister of Finance agreed with us and was very kind and made the necessary amendments to the law to allow Wigton to be able to report the income taxes at 25%. And when those adjustments are made retrospectively, this is what we end up with, this tax income. So it's one-off, it's exceptional, please take note of that. But we'll take the good results just the same, $839 million. That's an EPS of 8 cents per share, which is pretty good. Total assets were down by 5% to $10.4 billion, and that's fundamentally because they're depreciating the assets, but they haven't added any new large projects. And so that's why you see a little bit of a shrinking asset base. I wouldn't be too concerned about that, and I think by the time we finish the program, you'll appreciate where we're coming from. In that $10 billion worth of assets, there's approximately $3.9 billion of cash. Please bear that in mind. Cash that's waiting to be deployed to expand the business, and we'll talk about upcoming projects as well in the program. Secondly, I want to note that the business has about $3.9 billion in debt, and it's relatively low cost debt. All at average cost of borrowing is about 7% or just below 7%. So I too agree that they shouldn't be in a rush to pay off that debt. The idea is to deploy the capital in a way that adds value to shareholders, and we believe at Wigton that they should be able to deploy that capital and earn a equity IRR of about 12% after tax. So looking for good projects to deploy that capital to grow the profitability of the business is where the business should be focused. In terms of debt to equity, it's like 40% leverage, very low leverage. Business generates about $800 million of $1 billion of EBITDA, down about 16% again, but has good interest cover, has very low debt to EBITDA, 2.5 times, and that's gross debt because the net debt is zero. $3.9 billion cash, $3.9 billion in debt. So net debt would be zero, but gross debt to equity about 40%, gross interest cover, really good, and very low level of leverage. So it's a great business that's storing off cash, generating good cash. Largest renewable IPP in the Caribbean, I dare say, and well poised for growth. We'll talk a little bit about that. Looking at the stats, Current share price $1.01. And with these results, that brings the PE down to 13 times. Book value per share is very low at 47 cents. So again, it demonstrates how asset rich the business is. And with $4 billion of cash, that's about equal to 36% of the market cap, which is $11 billion. We discussed that on the last sales program last week. There are only two companies I know that have this level of cash relative to the market cap, and Wigton is the sort of the second one that I was hinting at. And it's a business that is really poised for growth. Why do I say it's poised for growth? Because Jamaica has this ambition of trying to get to 50%, I think is the target, Gary, renewable energy penetration by 2030. And they would need to, first of all, I think it's impossible to get there by 2030 because that's only like 6 years away. But in order to do that, we would need to really more than double or triple the amount of renewable energies we have in the market space today. And so that means Wigton has the opportunity to double or treble its capacity if it does well in responding to the future RFPs, requests for proposals for generation expansion bids, which we know are to come. There's one 100 megawatt RFP that's out. We'll talk about a bit about that, Gary. I know Wigton has a really good bid in there. And we're told there's another RFP that's going to come by year end. So we're looking forward to that. Next slide shows the profitability by quarter. And it's been, you see a little spots here and there. And that's associated, like the Q4 2023 was the taxation hit that they took at the end of the previous financial year. And then they unwound that in this Q4 2024. That's a big part of why we're seeing the $348 million profit in Q4 2024. There was a very small loss in Q3 2024, which is unusual. But again, overall wind regime was down. And so that impacted them a little bit. But in general, it's a business that I would like to think will make $500, $600 million a year profit easily. And then it has the growth opportunities on top of that. Next slide shows the trading history of the stock. And it's in the last, I want to say 12 weeks, we've seen one of the few stocks on the Jamaican market today that is actually up by about 40%. So this is rare in the context of what's happening in the market overall. So Wigton, if you had this one in your portfolio like I did, you'd be happy because you'd be up 40%, and it's up to 101. And I think the sky is the limit. And I think you'll agree as we continue in the program. So great performance so far, Gary. A little bit of luck with the taxation charge, but I think, again, by the time we finish the program, folks will appreciate the great potential that Wigton has to go forward. So again, guys, remember, put in your questions. I see a few coming in already. We're going to get to them closer to the end of the program. I've got about 8 questions that I'd like to get through with Gary to move the program along in a little order, and then we'll come to questions that we see on social media. So first one up is, they made this $800 million profit. We know it's because of this big tax credit, Gary. What strategies are going to be implemented going forward to preserve your profitability?
Well, Dan, let me first of all thank you for having me and for your very kind introduction. It is certainly a pleasure to be here this afternoon.
Welcome.
And it's good talking to you again. You mentioned that we spent some time together at JPS, but more importantly, we actually started our career at KPMG.
This is correct.
So we do have a similar history there. So first of all, let me commend the team that perhaps I would say predates me in terms of the performance for last year. We have a really solid, experienced and capable team at Wigton. And I know that they were also very instrumental in working with the government, and particularly the Minister of Finance. I am really very pleased with the position that the minister has taken with respect to incentivizing organizations and entities to make more investment in renewable energy. I think that speaks very well for the future of energy in Jamaica. There are some global mega trends that are taking place, and we are not immune to those. Decentralization, decarbonization, and electrification, and those are presenting some opportunities and some real threats. Going forward, as you mentioned, the tax regime moving from 33% to 25% is something that we'll continue to benefit from in the future. Perhaps not to the extent of the one-off deferred tax credit, but certainly going forward, we'll have that benefit. But more importantly, as you mentioned, Wigton is really poised to take advantage of the many opportunities that are being presented in the energy industry right now. And our strategy is really going to be around diversification, growth through diversification. Right now, Wigton is a wind play organization, and we really want to move beyond that. We want to look at several other technologies that are available in the renewable space. We believe in sustainable development, and we're going to remain true to the core in terms of investing in the energy business and related areas. I believe that will unlock a lot of potential and growth opportunity for Wigton, and that is something I'm sure our shareholders out there are expecting, and that is going to be our focus for the next 3 years.
Okay, very good. So I know, for instance, we're talking about expansion, we're talking about diversification. I think it's public information. The government had a 100 megawatt RFP, request for proposal, folks, and maximum bid that any one entity could submit was 50 megawatts. I'm well informed that Wigton has a very competitive 50 megawatt bid that has been submitted. I believe we can say openly it's solar technology, so Wigton chose to put a solar bid in. And Gary, what are your expectations within the next 2 months or so? We should hear the results of this RFP. What are your thoughts?
Yes, and I think putting in that bid, I would suggest, is a critical part of our diversification effort. It is significant if you consider that right now the capacity that Wigton has is 62, just about 62 megawatts, and we have put in a bid for 50 megawatts of solar. So you can see, we're looking at perhaps just if we were to get that, a significant shift in the concentration in wind energy and revenues. So that is something that we are really very excited about. We don't know specifically when the GPE, that is the General Procurement Entity, we are not sure exactly when they are going to announce the winners. There's an expectation that maybe early to late summer. And so we're keeping our fingers crossed.
Very good. So there's an opportunity for Wigton to increase its capacity by approximately 80%, should you be successful in that bid. And I know there was an opening of the bids. It was done in sort of a public way. And I know for a fact that Wigton was sort of in the top 3 considerations. So there's a good chance, folks, from my certain knowledge, that Wigton could be successful with that solar bid. And so, Gary, let's talk a little bit about, I think we've discussed rebranding Wigton and the idea that, it says Wigton Wind Farm Limited, but you're already doing more than just wind. You want to talk a little bit about that? So we talked about diversification. People hear the name Wigton Wind Farm and think there's so many other sources of renewables. Surely we're not constrained to wind alone.
Yes, and the public will very soon see signals of that shift. We have just recently registered a new traded name. So it will be Wigton Energy going forward.
Wigton Energy.
Wigton Energy. And that is signaling to the market that, we are going to be big players in the energy field and not just wind. So that is something we're particularly excited about. We have a new logo also that we have started the registration process. And so you're going to be very soon seeing some billboards and some other evidence of our shift into the growth by diversification. So that is something we're particularly excited about. But already we are participating in RFPs for energy projects outside of wind. Okay. Some of them we have won and we are in the process of implementing as we speak, either directly or through a joint venture. So that process has actually started already, the process of moving into other areas outside of wind.
Good deal. So I think it's safe to say that we're not going to come back in 6 or 9 months' time and see that you're still sitting down on $3.9 billion cash. You're trying to actively figure out ways to deploy that cash and expand the business. Is that a fair assumption, Gary?
That is a fair that's a fair assumption. But of course, when it comes to financing big projects, we have to look at the proper mix in terms of our capital structure, our gearing, and just being sure that we have the actual right mix, because there are several projects that we want to pursue in the future. We're not just looking locally, we're looking Caribbean wide and hopefully one day globally. But right now our big vision is to be a Caribbean conglomerate with heavy investments in energy. So how we deploy the cash, the debt to equity ratio, and so on. Those are things that we're going to be considering as we move forward.
Absolutely. And is it correct to say that from the IRP or the GP, we've heard signals of an intention perhaps to have another RFP as early as the end of this year?
Yes. There is an IRP out, and there is a draft IRP. We're waiting for the finalization of that. I think that will bring greater certainty to potential investors.
Right.
But we are really very pleased with the fact that new energy projects are being put out by the GPE and through the ministry for new projects, large projects, renewable projects, and the expectation based on the IRP is that there are going to be other big RFPs coming out, and certainly Wigton intends to be a major player in those new bids.
I appreciate that. What are some of the challenges that Wigton is currently facing in the renewable energy sector, and what would you say are the approaches that you're going to be taking to overcome some of these obstacles?
Well, I think you intimated earlier that when we're dealing with renewables, there is a certain level of uncertainty.
Yeah.
One year you might have really good wind, the other year might not be as good as we would have experienced last year. And so diversification, again, has to be central to our strategy. If we have a mix of, for example, solar and wind, the expectation is that we wouldn't have that heavy concentration risk. And so if in one particular year we don't have the same wind regime or a lesser wind regime, then we'd have some balance with solar. So that I think is important. The variability is something that it's nature. We really have no control of, but we can take steps to mitigate that risk. And also, I think, Dan, like several other organizations, we continue to suffer from the lag impact of COVID and the supply chain. And so we have seen in some instances where prices have been higher on capital equipment. We have continued to experience some delays, and that could have an impact on projects. What we have done, though, is to build our relationships with our suppliers. We have got much closer to them. We have set up special arrangements. And more importantly, we have tried to get into the manufacturing process much earlier than we would have. So we have taken a number of steps to mitigate that risk. So the industry isn't without challenge, but I think we are ideally poised, and we have taken a number of steps to mitigate those risks.
Very good. And so you mentioned diversity, you mentioned expansion. Could you say what present stage you are in relation to that expansion or diversification strategy? Yes.
So we are in a very dynamic industry.
Yeah.
Technology is changing very quickly. The solar panels are becoming a lot more efficient. Battery technology is improving almost daily.
Yeah.
And so our strategy document has to be a living, live document that we continuously review. And that is something that we are doing right now. We have seen significant reduction in prices of solar panels, in batteries. Inverter technology is becoming really very intelligent right now. For those of you who have rooftop solar, residential rooftop solar, you will be familiar with the apps and the improvement in the technologies, and
Right.
that is being extended to utility scale offers.
Excellent. Also, Gary, it's I mean, so diversification, I think it's no secret, and I've heard one or two friends criticize or comment or question. So the EV strategy, and we can see that the results have not been so well from the startup entity, but just the EV strategy itself conceptually. And by the way, you're less than 30 days on the job. When did you officially start?
Yeah, May 6th,
May
yes.
6th. So you're still coming up to speed, but I would expect in 60 days, I mean, you're no stranger to this industry, you'll be up to 100% speed. But let's talk a little bit about the EV strategy and how you feel about that strategy. Is it a good fit for Wigton? Is it something you think you guys will pursue? How do you feel about the EV strategy in general for you guys?
So as I mentioned earlier, that is a mega trend that is, we're really very bullish. We believe that is going to happen. There are a number of ICE, internal combustion engine manufacturers, who have already announced dates by when they're going to actually stop producing internal combustion engine cars. So there's no if or buts about it. The only question is at what rate, what speed. And we are actually very bullish on the uptake of electric vehicles. It is happening everywhere. We are going to be looking at that as a part of our portfolio of projects and perhaps expanding in that area also. Specifically how we play that is something that we are still discussing at this point in time in our strategic discourse.
Okay, and then what are Wigton's long-term goals, and how does the firm intend to preserve its dominant position in the renewable energy sector?
So long-term goals, as I mentioned, our vision is to be a Caribbean conglomerate. We want to be the number one renewable company within the Caribbean. We're already that in Jamaica.
Yep.
And I believe as far as wind is concerned, we have the largest wind farm in the Caribbean. But more importantly, we want to be known, as I said, as Wigton Energy. We want to be in several different Caribbean countries, and we want to be known for a diversified portfolio of products in the energy area.
Okay, very good. And what strategies did Wigton put in place to safeguard the company against potential weather damage in the future? And we heard about wind production being down by 17%, for instance. So I think it's natural to wonder about damage itself. Yeah.
Yes. Well, Wigton has been around for over 20 years, so they have a solid engineering team, great staff. We have a hurricane preparation plan. We have a checklist. There are several activities that we embark upon in preparation for the hurricane season, pushing up the transmission lines, looking at our substations, doing all the work that is necessary before. We have a structure, an emergency operating structure, a business continuity plan that comes into play should there be an emergency or a natural disaster. So I believe that is something that we have solid systems and processes in place to manage.
Okay, very good. And we've heard about some restructuring at Wigton. How has this change in leadership benefited the company thus far, and what can we expect going forward?
Yeah, the way I'd like to put it is that Wigton up to now has been managed and led, and that leadership has provided a solid foundation for the future.
Yeah.
As we look to diversify, we recognize that we're going to have to ensure that Wigton is designed for success based on its vision of being a Caribbean conglomerate and a diversified organization. That will mean that there's going to be some level of retraining among our staff, engineering skills. Maybe there's a heavy concentration in wind. We have already started to expose our engineers to solar technology. In fact, they are quite competent to the point that they have developed their own training school, and we pass through a number of schools and institutions such as HART through our training lab.
Okay.
So we're getting there very quickly. Our team has been attending a lot of conferences and so on. So we're really very excited about that. And in addition, Dan, we will have to consider infusion of new skills. Traditionally, wind one customer, an operating organization. Now we have to become aggressive in the marketplace. So we're going to be looking at new marketing skills. We have to be agile, we have to be nimble, we're going to have to be aggressive, we're going into a competitive arena. So both in terms of culture and systems and processes, we really have to be very efficient. And those are some of the things that we are going to be concentrating on over the next 6 months.
Good deal. And I do want to pick up on that. So again, Wigton perhaps makes more than 90% of its revenues from its one customer, JPS, which is the single buyer of electricity in Jamaica. So all independent power producers, IPPs, sell their power to Wigton under typically long-term contracts called PPAs, power purchase agreements. Wigton has 3 phases of PPAs, and they're supplying power to JPS. So even this 50 megawatt expansion, if you're successful and the GP selects you, which I expect will happen, you would again have a 4th PPA where you're selling power exclusively to JPS under fixed price terms for energy only. So just to make that clear distinction for folks, and then to lead me into my next question, Wigton Phase One, Gary, we know that PPA. That PPA, it came to the end of its 20-year period. I believe Wigton has gotten some level of extension, which you can expand on. But we're curious to know, where are we with the replacement? What's happening with the replacement to Wigton Phase One? What can we expect going forward in relation to that? That's 20.7 megawatts, 1/3 of your revenues, and therefore 1/3 of your assets are sort of come to their sort of end of their economic life, more or less, and it's time to work on the expansion. Can you just tell us a little bit about where you are in that process?
Well, so the first thing I'd say is that we are pleased that we were able to get an addendum to the current PPA signed by GPS. So we have an extension.
Okay.
We are also pleased that the Minister of Energy was able to renew this license. So Wigton 1, we now have the capacity to repower Wigton 1. So those are, I think, 2 important points I wanted to start with. We are currently doing the assessment right now. We're looking at several options. We are talking to suppliers so that we can put a business case. I mean, our objective is when we repower, we want to be sure that we provide the lowest cost of energy to our customers through JPS. And that is really very, very important to us. So we are scouring the market right now, looking for the right partners to do the repowering. And we expect that that decision will be made this year and that we would commence the process next year of repowering. That is the build out.
Okay, very good. And by partners, you're probably talking about the actual, I'm going to say EPC contractors.
EPC contractors,
the times
yes.
Engineering, procurement, and construction team
Right.
that would actually build out the power plant for you, whatever the technology is you go with, and help you implement it, and then for you guys to operate it thereafter. So before the end of this year, you're hoping that we'll be able to make an announcement on how you're going to execute on that replacement project, which I think is very important to the future of Wigton. So, folks, stay tuned. You're gonna hear over the next 2 or 3 quarters, I think, lots of exciting things happening at Wigton. Again, I really do expect Gary Barrow to bring his 3 decades of experience in leadership in utility businesses, whether it's telecoms or electricity, or specifically renewables. The fundamentals of regulatory economics remain the same. He's used to working with regulators and dealing with tariffs and with utility businesses. Wigton is perhaps, and no disrespect, the least complex business you've perhaps worked with less than 60 persons compared to a JPS with over 2,000 and cable and wireless in its heyday with over 3,000 in 16 different countries. So I really do have high expectations for you, Gary, and for the Wigton team. I also want to take this moment to give a big shout out to Earl Barrett, the former managing director who led the company for approximately 16 years, I want to say, and retired end of March. And I'm very pleased with the changing of the guard. And I know the team at Wigton very well, and you do have a pretty competent team. It's lean, nice and lean. Like I said, less than 60 persons in total, folks, generating $800 million of profit. So it's a pretty impressive business. Leading in the space, certainly in Jamaica, and then in a country where we're obsessed with trying to reduce the cost of electricity, and renewables are certainly one of the ways to do it, and to do it in a clean, green manner is sort of the commitment of the government. So when you look at the industry and the outlook, the space and the position of Wigton, strength of its balance sheet, it's just a no-brainer. To me, you guys should be buying a lot more of this stock to hold for the medium to long term. Jamaica is committed as a small island developing nation to trying to reduce our dependence on oil. I've said this before in the past. Our single largest import of Jamaica is oil, and our oil bill alone exceeds the total exports of the country. I'll let that digest for a second. Oil alone exceeds total exports of the country, and we have sun and wind and hydro and many other sources of renewable energies. I'd like personally, Gary, to say a waste to energy project go forward as well too, right? So that instead of having a dump, we could turn our dump into a proper landfill. So there's lots of opportunities for us to explore as a nation, promoting renewables, the use of renewables, and the technology has gotten so much cheaper now than the traditional thermal plants or fossil fuel plants. So I expect the solar bids that are coming in out of this RFP to be all south of, 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour, when we have thermal power plants producing energy at 12 cents per kilowatt hour. So we're looking at renewable sources being substantially cheaper. We're comparing apples and oranges to the extent that the renewables aren't firm capacity, and storage, Gary, is the holy grail. We're going to have to figure out how to store that energy so that we can reuse it when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing. So I do agree that 7 cents per kilowatt hour is not firm capacity, and so I don't want to mislead people, but it still is cheap, low cost energy. So exciting to hear that Wigton Phase One is coming soon, that the expansion of Wigton is also coming soon by virtue of the 100 megawatt RFP, and potentially I believe there's 168 megawatt RFP, folks, coming perhaps as early as December, and I think Wigton will be very well poised to do well in that. So I don't know what else I could say to try to convince you guys that this is a great company, very well poised in a great sector. Huge balance sheet, $3.9 billion of cash, just looking for a home to be deployed in good projects. And that 50 megawatt project, alone will not consume that cash. They will have enough cash resources to do other projects. Okay, so with that, I still have 2-3 more questions to come, but I see the queue on social media going crazy, so I want to get at some of the questions. I suspect we've probably answered a few by now. I see Limitless podcast with about 5 questions, so I'm going to look at 2 of them and then shift to a few others. First one he has JPS or the GP given an update on your renewable energy bids? And so I think we spoke to that. We're really hoping by the end of the summer to get the response to that. And I think Wigton will be very well positioned to deal with that. Does Wigton have any upcoming plans with Inter Energy? Wow, Limitless podcast, go to the front of the class. I'm not too sure what that question exactly is about, but time will tell. What I can say is the 10% ownership cap, we all know, has been removed. And so I fully expect over the next 3, 4, 5 months that we're going to see new, larger shareholders trying to take a position in Wigton, which is a very attractive asset. Again, last one I'm going to give to Limitless Podcast. Will you be, I'm quoting him, Gary, I didn't make this up. Will you be buying shares, Mr. Gary Barrow? Shareholders like to see management having skin in the game.
Certainly, and I will. Actually, I wanted to, before now, but of course, we were in a blackout period, so I was not allowed to buy any shares as an officer of the organization and being privy to the financial information. I think that blackout period, having submitted our financials now, should be coming to an end, and definitely there will be some skin in the game.
Good deal. And I promise you in 6 months' time, we need to add some kind of share compensation to your salary package to keep you motivated to see the company do well. Philip Burgess, our longtime friend, says, has the repowering of phase one begun, or will that be rolled into the next GPE project? So Philip, hopefully we answered that question. They've gotten permission to repower phase one. They got an extension to the existing PP until they can complete that repowering. They're at a very advanced stage in assessing what they would like to have implemented. Seems like they need to just finish all of that analysis and working with the partners to do the costing, etc. Ultimately go back to the OUR, the regulators, to get the approval and then move forward with the implementation of that project. And Gary's saying he expects that planning phase to be done this year and let's start the implementation next year. So good question, Philip. 2 AGMs ago, the MD spoke to Wigton getting into agricultural, including castor beans. Is that still part of the revenue diversification plans going forward? A question from Philip Burgess, Gary.
Yes. So as I mentioned, our strategic plan is really a living document, just based on the dynamism in the industry right now. That project and others we are revisiting. I can tell you straight off that our diversification plan consists of not just thinking that we have to stick fully in energy, but go, in related areas. So I'd be careful to say that agriculture is a related area, so we are revisiting that. But certainly when it comes to energy projects and horizontal diversification or adjacent markets, that is where we're going to be concentrating our efforts. So we are reviewing some of the plans that we had and some of the projects that we are pursuing before to ensure that it fits within our definition of diversification.
Yep, I appreciate that. And this is the only time I'll divulge a conversation I had with Joey Issa, and I think it's something we discussed very briefly at the board. We definitely also want to stay away from, what I'm going to call tiki projects. So with $3.9 billion of cash to deploy, we're not going to be distracted by 50 million Jamaican dollar projects and 70 million Jamaican dollar projects, because it won't move the needle, Philip. So we're going to be more focused on projects that can move the needle. And as Gary says, as long as it's related to the energy sector in any way, shape, or form, I think we'll give favorable consideration to same. Do you think the 839 will be the best financial year performance, or do you think we will beat 839 at the end of this financial year? Oh, Philip is asking. So we're careful with the forward-looking statements, I would say, Philip. But I do think the future profitability growth of Wigton, and Wigton has done 500, 550, 600 million in several years in the past. And I think the ability to double its profitability is very possible, especially if they get the Wigton Phase One done and then get a 50 megawatt project done successfully, then yes, I think we could see them doubling their normal run rate. And I would think of 550, 600 million as a normal run rate. So I personally, Philip, would like to come back in 3 years' time and see the profit breaking the $1 billion mark for sure. I think that's very possible. And I think Wigton, in terms of access to capital, will have no challenges with either raising debt or raising equity. I'm sure you guys, if you were to hear of an APO because Wigton wants to raise $2-3 billion to do an expansion project, I don't think Wigton would have a problem doing that. So Philip, short answer for me is 2-3 years. I think they'll break the $1 billion mark, quite frankly. That's going to be our expectation at the board level. So you guys can take that to the bank. Tavares Donaldson asks, with the new changes taking effect, does Wigton still have to continue the JV with IEC Energy? I literally didn't make it up. I just saw that there. So I don't know, Gary, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes. Again, Dan, as you mentioned, I'm just barely 4 weeks into the job. Yep. So I'm just reevaluating, a number of projects. Strategic partnership partnerships will be an important part of our strategic intent going forward. So there's no doubt about it. When we look at strategic partners, we're going to be looking at what we bring to the table and what they bring to the table, and ensure that there's some mutual benefit in coming together to focus on particular projects and so on. So it is definitely a part of our strategy going forward. To speak specifically of partners that we work with now or new partners, that is going to depend on the market conditions and the opportunities that present themselves.
Yep, makes sense. I know for a fact in response to Virus that the 50 megawatt bid that you guys submitted, that's just you. You didn't have to partner with anybody financially.
No,
the partners will be the OEM or the EPC
contractors.
Right, very good. Will you let us know what your plans are for the land at Ferry Pen? Philip Burgess is asking that question. Is that something you care to comment on, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just mention again, and I'm putting it in the context of our strategic plan and focusing on the areas that are energy related.
Yeah.
Right. So we're looking back at those investments. We can't say that we have made any specific decisions yet, but we really, as you mentioned, Dan, we really want to be sure that we preserve our cash position to really capitalize on the very large energy-related projects.
Yeah, that makes good sense. And 10 minutes to go. All right, folks, still questions are coming in. Was Wigton Energy your idea? If not, whose? I guess the title Wigton Energy, Philip Burgess is asking is, was it your idea, or if not, whose? I don't know.
Yes. So, the reason for Wigton Energy, of course, moving from Wigton Wind Farm is, as we mentioned, to signal to the market that we are actually moving away from a sole player in wind to having a diversified portfolio of projects that are energy related. So yes, I work very closely with the team at Wigton. We brainstormed, we had few focus groups that we worked with, and that is really how the name came up. We had a discussion with the board, we presented a couple of different options, and that is what we settled on. And something I'm really happy with. I think it captures really the direction that we're going in, and so get used to the name, and you'll be seeing a new logo very soon.
I like it. Wigton Energy. And Tavares Donaldson, I think we just answered your question. Was the solar bid that was submitted in response to the 100 megawatt RFP done through a joint venture? No, it was not. It was done by Wigton in its own merit. Brandon Thomas asks, are acquisitions being pursued to fast track regional expansion?
So acquisitions are not off the table.
Okay.
There are none being pursued at the moment. The expansion, I think, as I mentioned, we're going to stay in the lane of energy. We are pursuing, I'll say though, that we are pursuing some big opportunities in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Based on where we are right now, I'm not at liberty to be specific, but they are really very big projects, and we are in discussion and we are in negotiations right now. But as I said, strategic partnerships, acquisitions are definitely in play.
Good deal. And Shamar Scott asks, why should we invest in Wigton? So let me take a crack at that. Perhaps you joined the program late. I don't know. But again, it's a well-run business, not very complex, quite frankly, 50 persons, very well positioned. It's been in the space for more than 20 years, largest independent power producer of renewable energy in Jamaica, certainly regionally in terms of wind. $3.9 billion cash on the balance sheet, generated over $800 million in cash flow in the last year, has very low leverage, and the stock's trading at $1. This is an industry where Jamaica is hoping to perhaps treble over the next decade, and it's pretty capital intensive. And so, a 50 megawatt project will run you into billions of dollars. So pretty capital intensive, You need to have some level of experience to do that business at that scale. There are not many others in the space, perhaps only 3 others in the Jamaican space. Yes, there are a lot of international players, but I think Wigton is very well poised, and it's only one of 2 companies in the energy space that's listed on the stock exchange. Certainly the only one. One of 2 companies that's in the space, and by virtue of its demonstrated profitability over the last 4 years, very profitable compared to the other entity that I can think of. So it's really a no-brainer if if you're living in a small island developing state that has this ambition of getting to 50% renewables in the next decade, then it's clear that there are much more renewables to come. And at 62 megawatts, although it is the largest IPP in that space, I mean, in 10 years' time, Wigton could be 200 megawatts. It's not inconceivable that they could grow by 4-fold in the next decade. That's not inconceivable based on the ambitious targets that Jamaica has. And what I like about it is that renewable energy, we've got to what we call grid parity. Gary, you can fully appreciate that. The idea that renewables are actually cheaper than thermal power plants. So we're not trying to go green and drive up the cost of energy at the same time. We're at a place now where many persons can implement their own solar solution away from the complexity of it and perhaps reduce their cost of energy. And so that's where we're at now. And at the utility scale level, I don't think we're going to see large thermal power plants being built in the future. Perhaps the 190 megawatt power plant we did 6 years ago, Gary, I think that may be the last time we see a 190 megawatt thermal power plant in Jamaica. I think going forward, you're going to see more 20, 30, 40, 50 megawatt renewable energy projects, and Jamaica really needs to capitalize on the renewable space. And you guys tend to think of solar and wind, but there's so much more. There are great waste to energy projects that we need to do as a country. There are great hydro projects we need to do as a country, and just continue to explore all of our natural resources. And with that, I will not take any more questions, but I will thank Shamar for that question. And hopefully you guys will appreciate why this is a good stock to buy. If you can get it at $1, up to $1.03, I think it's a good buy. I hope in 5 years' time we'll come back and the stock is worth 5-fold. That's not inconceivable. And so it's a great company, a good management team. I can't quite say good board because I'd be complimenting myself, but it does have a good board. And I really do think it is poised for growth. And I think over the next year, just keep listening to the space quarter by quarter. I think for the next 4 quarters, every quarter you're going to hear some announcement that convinces you more and more, why Wigton is a good stock to have in your medium to long-term portfolio. I just can't think of anything better right now. And that's good value for money at the current price. If you didn't buy it at 60 cents 6 months ago, it's still not too late, quite frankly. Okay, all right. Well, folks, I want to make an announcement. We had some giveaways to do, and I want to say thanks a lot, guys. As we promised, we'll now announce who the winners are. So congratulations to, I can never pronounce these names properly, at Don Jody, RO_Han596, Natural Beauty Jamaica. That one was easy for me. Our team will reach out via social media platforms so that you guys can collect your prizes courtesy of Wigton. Thanks for that, Gary. Well, folks, that's it. For those of you who joined late, you can tune in, catch it back on YouTube. It'll always be there. And with that, we'll bring today's discussions to an end. And I'd like to thank our viewers, as usual, for tuning in. Your support is always appreciated. Big thanks to Gary for coming on the program today. We really appreciated you coming here, Gary.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
And for providing those invaluable insights. I'd like to thank folks again for tuning in. To our viewers, be sure to look out for updates on our virtual investor forum by following us on social media. We share all things forum related on our social media pages. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Mayberry Investments Limited. And remember, wise investors, slow and steady wins the race. Keep safe, everybody. Bye.
The Mayberry Investments Limited Virtual Investor Forum has been the standard for investor education in Jamaica for decades, where top financial minds provide comprehensive insight into the market and ideal investment strategies and opportunities for our clients. Celebrating 37 years of excellence in investment banking. The Mayberry Virtual Investor Forum, investing in Jamaica.